Oh, is it after lunch? You need to get up and stretch? No? All right. We have an amazing panel here. Good afternoon. My name is Amy Lazarus. I am the founder and CEO of Inclusion Ventures. Everyone's like, what is this white woman doing caring about this work? So I just want to name that white elephant in the room. I was born and raised in a community outside of Cleveland, Ohio that's 50-50 black-white. It was actually cool in high school to try out to be in the Dialogue on Race Relations Club. And Candace is here. Shout out to Shaker Heights High School alumni. They did Race Relations Club. And at every stage of life, really looking at why isn't this more of the norm? What does it take for people to create spaces where they can belong because of and despite of differences? And so parlaying that into a passion to really create a space where people can bring themselves, as you'll hear in a moment from these panelists. So Inclusion Ventures helps to have organizations bring out the best in your people so that together you can bring your world-changing ideas to life. And looking forward to hearing some examples of that from our illustrious panelists. So I will invite you to introduce yourselves with your name, one of the hats you're wearing, which is your title and company, and then also, what are you most proud of when it comes to your work around diversity and inclusion?
Hi, I'm Sonja Gittens-Ottley. I lead diversity and inclusion at Asana, which is a work tracking tool. We're about 300 people with offices in San Francisco, Dublin, and New York. What am I most passionate about? What I'm proud of? I was the first person to lead diversity and inclusion at Asana, and one of the things that I'm still most passionate about is the fact that I've gotten our company and our culture to really go beyond talking about diversity and inclusion in an abstract, we believe in this sort of way, to understanding what that actually means. I introduced a series that we call the Real Talk series in February of 2016, and we've spoken about a number of different topics, from what it's actually like to be Black in America, what it means to be a Muslim in America in the post-election world, what it means to be an ally, and having those conversations really framed by the experiences of our panelists. They're not speaking for the entire experience. They're giving an illustration of what it means and what actions our staff can take to do better and be better.
Great, thank you. And before Ben goes in a moment here, we were talking backstage. This is really going to be more of a conversation than a panel. We really want this to be actionable for you all, to be able to take some great insights back. And I'm excited to introduce you to my new friends. Go ahead, Ben.
So I'm Benjamin Evans. I'm the design lead of the anti-diversity.
Get off the stage! No, we're inclusive.
And I knew I was going to say that before I came on. So it's the anti-discrimination team, is the team I'm design lead of. And that's for Airbnb. And I suppose one of the things that I'm most proud of is, as a company, I feel that we were one of the very first to take a real active stance against issues surrounding discrimination. We drew that line in the sand, saying that we believe that everyone around the world deserves to belong. And so we made that part of not only our terms of service, but also creating teams that purposefully are there to try and discover, can we solve issues like sexism and racism within product? Can we bring people together in a meaningful way and really, reclaim what we kind of have lost, given that everyone is so used to having a screen in between each other at all times?
Great, thanks.
My name is Anchalee. I was previously a software engineer at Uber, and I'm currently at a startup called Hustle. And the thing that I am the most proud of so far in my career is you may recognize my faces from the BART station ads in 2015 that led me to accidentally starting the I Look Like an Engineer movement, where hundreds of thousands of incredible people decided to share the hashtag, host meetups, have their own billboard campaigns. And it's kind of crazy that 2 years later, people are still using it. And here I am now, continuing the conversation.
Inspiring.
I'm so excited to sit next to you. I've actually showed your campaign to my daughter, so we have to take that selfie later, and I can show her when I go home that I actually met you in person. My name is Hussaini, and I manage diversity and inclusion programs at PayPal, and I'm most proud of a program we recently started at PayPal called Recharge, which is focused on bringing women who've taken a career break back to tech. And if I'm not mistaken, Reem, are you out here? We've got a returner right here, and she's actually returning at Medallia, is it right? And so we have a cohort starting next week of more than 30 women, mostly women. I think we have a couple men in our cohort who are all technologists who have taken a career break, whether they took care of young children or a sick parent, and are returning to the workforce. So it's really amazing to be able to impact people's lives and also change our culture at work and make it more inclusive.
Wow, thank you all. Yeah, I was impressed before when we were talking back there. Now it just continues. Sanjay, you talked about how people are talking about this theoretically, and we often notice that people know intellectually that diversity and inclusion is good for business, but they're doing things that are leading not to that. And so really helping with some of the tactics and strategies for helping make good on the promise of diversity and inclusion. So I'm curious for all of you, when have you noticed a time where there was room for improvement there? And what tactically and strategically did you do to help the company or your team get there? Isis, you're smirking.
Well, there's always room for improvement. Oh, so much room for improvement. So I can actually speak to this. So I joined Uber after starting the I Look Like an Engineer movement because I wanted to help create positive change there. And my experiences were actually incredibly positive while I was there. I decided to move on because I found this opportunity at Hustle to have more of a pivotal role in defining the culture there. And so since joining, actually, one of the programs that I've helped pioneer there is called Engineer in Residence, which is it's a new type of contract to hire spin on the technical interview process. So software engineers, for interviews, you have to traverse matrices and spirals and give the asymptotic time complexity of this, which is completely almost irrelevant to what you do in your regular job. And also, as they acknowledge and respect that candidates should be interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing us. And so this program is a contract to hire where you need code references and, well, you need verbal references from previous managers and companies and code samples so you can demonstrate that you're capable of doing the job. But then you come on as a contract to hire, and then you're basically interviewing each other for the next 6 weeks until you finish your project.
Oh, great, thank you.
And this has also been really amazing at attracting fantastic candidates into our pipeline. People that would want to leave their company but didn't feel like they wanted to have to go through all of the crap that comes with studying for technical interviews. They're like, well, we can do the job, but we don't want to have to jump through all of the hoops to do all of these other things to prove that. And so we just let them prove that they're capable of doing the job.
Great, thanks. Others?
Yeah, to add on to that, one of the things that I think is super important is being able to go beyond that passion that employees all have for diversity, that a number of employees have for diversity, and translating that into here's the actions that you can take and what does that actually mean for your company. So to Isis's point, this is the value that this brings to the company, but it's also an opportunity for people to get a foot into the door. So it's how are you showing and speaking the language to the business so that they understand the value. If for them, they need to understand the business value, but you're still getting your mission done, right? Which is super important. So it's really knowing the audience and the stakeholders that have to be involved and speaking to them in a way that gets to your purpose as well as the objectives that they want to get to.
Can you tell us a little bit more about identifying a need and then starting the Recharge program? How did you do that? Any lessons learned?
Right, thanks, Amy. And so to build on what Isis and Sonja both said, I remember when I was working on trying to pitch the Recharge program to our leadership. You know, we had done some focus groups and studies around why are women leaving, you know, tech. And it's not specific to PayPal. I think it's across the industry. Women are leaving roles at the midpoint in their career. And so we were trying to understand what's going on here. We did these focus groups, and as we were having these conversations, at the end of each conversation, every person said, you know, and I'd really love to come back, but nobody will hire me. And by the 8th conversation, I thought, there's something going on here. And so we decided to pitch this program where we have this opportunity for women to ramp and really solve this problem, right? So number one, right, like what is the problem you're solving? But number two, what is the value that your solution actually delivers, right? And you have to prepare for that conversation, because anytime you pitch, you have to know who your stakeholders are and what their needs are and what is what you're doing going to bring to them, as well as solve whatever problem you're looking at, right? And so I'm getting ready for this pitch. How many of you guys have seen 8 Mile? Anybody know the movie I'm talking about, right? That conversation that, is it Cheddar Bob has with B. Rabbit, where he's like, what are you gonna do when the guy says like all the things that are wrong with like, you know, you? And I always take that as inspiration and look at, okay, when I go into a conversation, I need to think of all the things they're gonna say for like why your idea won't work and be ready, right? And like you have that slide prepared where they bring something up and you're like, oh, but actually I've already thought about it and this is what's important, right? And so I prepped all the 72 different questions I thought would come up, and I was pumped, I was ready, I had an answer for everything, right? It was like a 1-hour discussion, and 7 minutes in, our CTO went, okay. And I swear I fish-faced. I was like, I wasn't ready for him to say yes, and I hadn't prepared about what was next. And so it's good to prepare well, but like think ahead. And if you've identified your problem and your solution well, I think it speaks for itself, right? And so like have confidence, and people will see that. And if you deliver value, then you'll find a way to move forward.
Awesome, thanks.
Just wanted to add into the tail end of that, this notion about being prepared, because if we all want more diversity within the companies and the groups that we're working with, and just because it's at the forefront of our mind doesn't it mean that it even exists in the majority of people around us. And so being like really prepared with, you know, what are the reasons that this matters to me? What is my why behind this? What is the value that I believe that this will bring to the company? And being prepared to express that to stakeholders, you know, obviously on a pitch basis, but also on a continued basis, because people may take a while to come around to your way of thinking. I think that is so essential if this is something that matters for you. Because, you know, the cultures that we create, well, we're the ones who create this culture. It starts with, you know, your employees. And there is such a lot of strength and power that comes from being prepared, finding people around you who believe the same things, who believe as you believe. And they're just making this motion, this movement from the ground up. It's a wonderful way to create the culture you want to spend your days in.
Ben, why do you care about this?
Why do I care about it? I care about it because I suppose I've always been told no with things. And even when you look at, you know, statistics for black males, like really what I'm doing now, I shouldn't exist if you look at a statistical level. Like I should be incarcerated or something like that. And so the notion of being, you know, a designer in tech who actually started my career as an actor years ago, there's something that has always kind of made me think, well, if someone says you can't do something, then you end up building this fear around it. And if you really kind of face that fear, you get to enjoy and express and find this new purpose and meaning. And so given that I've now found that within myself, I like being able to share it with other people and figure out, can I ignite that within them? Because together we can create that future that we want. So, yeah.
Seeing a lot of smiles as I look around, hearing your story. Thank you. You mentioned hearing Muna's story. Obviously, her CTO said yes very quickly. For some of the folks who may have come here for some answers around, well, what if my CTO isn't like Muna's? How else can I get their buy-in for something that I'm passionate about or want to move something forward? What else have you seen work to get buy-in from various stakeholders?
I have thoughts. I have 2 thoughts. One is seeing whether there's anyone else in your company who can help be an advocate for this. and tapping into that and using some of that capital. The other thought is perhaps wondering if this is the right company for you. And I think we've touched on it, but I just kind of want to reiterate, it is as important for a company to have you as you are to find the company that's right for you. And do not forget that you have that power, and align with a company that values what you value. And if that's something that you value, you can try once. You can certainly try to speak it in a language that might be the language that is relevant for your exec. But then you have to stop and think about whether this makes sense for you.
Thanks.
I'd add on to what Sonja said is, I think the word you said backstage was like being strategic, right? About when there's a problem that you've identified and you're trying to introduce change, what are all the different levers that you can, play with to affect the situation, right? And so you got to ask yourself, what is the outcome that you're trying to drive, and what's realistic, and how, like, where you are now and where you need to go, and what are the things that you do. And you need to know that change happens slowly. It doesn't happen overnight. And so where is your locus of control? And you start with that, right? I'm going to start with talking to the person who sits next to me. I'm going to start with talking to my team, because hopefully they're my friends and they care about me. I'm going to talk to my boss. I'm going to talk to my peer teams. I'm going to start to build a coalition of the willing, right? Because if what you're talking about is important, people are going to get on the boat with it. And then, you have to go through all the same. By the way, this is the same process that happens when someone's trying to introduce change for a technical project. It's nothing different. It's just the content is slightly different, and you have to socialize the idea a little bit more. And you have to ask yourself, like, what is your appetite for the crunchiness, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to pay the piper, right? So if it's now and it's the stress that you eat and your health deteriorates, like, you have to understand the opportunity cost of everything you're doing. And so ultimately, it is okay to say, this is not for me. But my request is that you make a choice and you ask for help before you do that, before throwing in the towel, because people around you, like, I know every single one of you is a superhero and has ESP, but, like, people can't read your mind, right? So you kind of have to share, like, here's my problem, but also here's what I'm looking for, so people know how to help you.
And adding into that, you are not alone. Like, whatever feelings that you might have and desires that you might have, you won't be the only one at your company or your environment with that. But you may be the first one who can actually vocalize and unite people behind this shared vision or shared goal, or even just the desire for change. But that really only comes about if you share it first.
I would also like to add that change doesn't always have to happen really slow. So I went from working at Uber, where change would have to happen really slow, to now at Hustle as the 8th engineer on the team. It's like one more person joins, and wow, that's actually a pretty big change. So we're hiring.
I'm reminded of, as you know, I'm from Cleveland. Sorry about Cavs and Warriors, I know. But there's a river, the Cuyahoga River, that runs right through Cleveland, as only 30 miles from point A to B, but it's very crooked. In fact, it means crooked in Native American language, Cuyahoga. And so from A to B, it's, with all the switchbacks, it's actually 100 miles. And so it takes a long time to get down the river. And so oftentimes for org change or for diversity and inclusion and belonging change, it's like, oh, we had this great Real Talk series, and everyone's, how do they just say a microaggression again? Are you kidding me, right? Okay. So to stay the course and move down there. What I've heard you all say kind of just shared with a perspective of someone in the audience who might be looking for, how do I make the change? There also might be some folks here who say, I want to support my colleagues who want to make the change. I don't have diversity and inclusion in my title. I'm an individual contributor at different levels. What can I do? What have you seen colleagues do well to support others who are trying to achieve diversity and inclusion goals?
I'll give you guys an example that everybody here can easily institute. I was working with a Scrum team, and there were individuals, we'll just say they were having some personal issues, and it was affecting performance on the team, right? So if you're in tech, more likely than not, you're probably on an agile team of some sort. They didn't want to violate each other's privacy, but they wanted to create a team atmosphere, right? So that whatever was going on in their teammates' personal lives was something that sometimes, like, if you just, address the elephant in the room, you can kind of deal with it and move on. And they started, and it was, again, using agile methodologies. Like, what can we do to make everybody more comfortable, right? And they added it as a story, and they put it in their next sprint, and the team had the conversation, right? Like, use the process. It doesn't have to be some magical thing that the D&I team pulls out of the air, right? Like, we're all beautiful people. We can figure things out. Ask a question. You're smart. You have answers. And so they introduced this concept of talking about, hey, just before we start our stand-ups every day, just share what's going on, whatever you feel comfortable with. And I think at first, for some people, it was weird because some people are very private, right? And for others, they have to overshare, and so they limited that answer to the question. That was something that the team agreed on. And as they did this over a few weeks of time, the person that was having personal issues actually spoke up and said, my mother is dying. And they got to a point where they were comfortable to share that with the team. But do you know what that did? It gave everyone else permission to support them. And guess what? The people that were pissed that that person wasn't showing up or pulling their weight were probably the most supportive, because now they understood what was going on, and the team dynamic completely changed, right? And so you don't have to do anything crazy to create an inclusive atmosphere or drive change. It's about having empathy and creating space for the conversations and understanding so that you can collectively find solutions.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Sometimes some of the other, something wonderful that I've witnessed working is really just to be a champion for someone else. Of course, like empathy and listening and understanding what's going on, but if you want to be an advocate, you want to be an ally, you're aware on some level of the problems that are going on. And so championing the work of others who may fit into specific underrepresented groups is just a really wonderful way to make them feel like they do belong and that their fears and concerns matter. And when you get into the habit of that and build it within the team, it's reciprocal. Everyone starts doing it for everyone else, and you have each other's back, and that goes a long way.
Thanks.
I think it's also really important to create a space where people that feel like they need to speak up about something can do that. And I think I'm allowed to share this story where
No tweeting, just in case.
so the original Hustle logo actually was a fist bump. And our designer they went through a pass where one of the icons in our branding was a yellow fist. And one of our employees actually raised their hand and they're like, hey, this could be interpreted not the way that we want it. So we should really think about this. And that led to creating this conversation over all of our branding and removing anything that could be associated with any type of human-related connection into kind of alien objects. So now our logo is a flag.
Thank you. This is a great kind of segue into how this shows up, not just in culture, but in other branding and marketing products. In a moment, we're going to open this up for audience questions and answers, so get those brilliant thoughts that you've been having for the past 20 minutes, get those ready. And Ben, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you see kind of in the anti-diversity work that you do. How you see this showing up. We were backstage, and I'm very aware that I have some white privilege happening with the microphone blending into my skin tone. Who created these microphones, and who likely didn't, and for whom, right? Who's the intended user and audience? How do you all at Airbnb, so hyper local, how do you account for all of this in what you're doing?
We build from always a place of empathy. And as you said, we do have to be both global and hyper local at the same time. And when you're bringing people from one culture into an entirely different one, all of these subtleties and nuances start bubbling up, which are, if you aren't primed for them or address them in some overt way, they can really lead to the perception of discrimination or bias. And so one of the things that we do is, number one, try and bring on as many different people as we can in interviews and user testing from different backgrounds so that we can understand what is the product like to use from their perspective. And one of the most recent insights that I really love is we were doing a lot of work with those who are vision impaired, and so when we looked at our product and the way that we were articulating things on it, we discovered that there was some ableist language in there. When we're advising hosts, here's what you need to do to hand over the keys, or directing guests that, if you just look for this in this area, we're using language that, although it's incredibly subtle, can really alienate a very large group of people. And it's a really easy fix that is really profound for those for whom it resonates with, but these are the kinds of things that you really only get out when you build from that place of empathy and you just continue to connect with as many different backgrounds and perspectives as you can so that they can tell you what's wrong, what's not working in the product.
Great, thanks. Power of language. Who has some questions? We have time for a few. Yeah, I see a hand. Candace? There's a microphone coming for you.
Thank you. A lot of the examples that were discussed were easy fixes or small changes that didn't have any negative impact on anybody else in the organization, and I agree that those are, awesome ways to improve inclusion and diversity, and I can see why CEOs would be super excited about them, but the fact of the matter is a lot of the changes that need to happen will have negative impacts on people who are benefiting from societies that have consistently oppressed other people and allowed them to just glide right on to the upper echelons of whatever experience they're on the fast track for. And so I'm wondering, those kinds of conversations, how do you facilitate that in your organization? How do you have challenging discussions about systematic oppression and how that's impacting you and needs to change?
Yeah. Thanks.
So I will attempt to answer that question, and I'll start by saying that I like to call myself an activist at heart, and I always want to start with what is the outcome I'm driving towards, and what is the change that I'm trying to affect. And if you want to speak truth to power to someone in a position of power, you have to know that there's going to be an implication, right? And so there's the spectrum of, I'm just gonna show up and I'm gonna tell you to your face, and right, I'm gonna say what I need to say, who cares what happens, but does that get you the outcome you're trying to drive, right? You can go into a house through the front door, you can also go in the back, open the sliding door and come in, right? You're still inside the house, it's your house, right? So you have to be strategic, in my opinion, in having those conversations, and I guess if you get to that point where you wanna speak truth to power and do what you need to do, that's fine. But for me, I think it's more important, and it serves people to sit down and take that person out to coffee one-on-one, make them comfortable and say, were you aware of this, right? May not be the most comfortable thing to do, but in my opinion, it's probably more effective. The other thing that I feel has been successful in changing someone's mind is I don't have to be the one to have the conversation. If I know who has that person's ear, maybe I have the conversation with that person, and then they have the conversation, which would be way more effective than me having the conversation, right? You have to, yes, it's not ideal, make them comfortable, right? People have been comfortable for a long time, right? And so you don't have to make them comfortable, but again, if I'm trying to affect change, I would rather go the path of least resistance, right? Nobody in power ever gave up anything because they were nice, right? So just some 2 cents there, and you have to, in my opinion, it's a slower process, right?
Yeah. And I would add into that were you about to? Okay. I was going to add into that it's something that I found has really worked is just answering the selfish need, what's in it for them. And I often think that you can either be right or you can make change. Sometimes those are opposite ends. And if you're willing to let go of the need to be right and say, yes, this is an issue we need to fix, but more to say, well, if you embrace this, here's how it can help you as a person. If you can find that avenue, people are far more accepting of a change of course and a change of direction.
I'd add on to that. I'd say that one of the things that I would try to do, and what I've done, is who are the people who are not on board with diversity and inclusion, and really identify them really early on. Who are the people that don't get this? Who are the, I didn't bother to remember his name, the guy from Google. Who's my guy from Google? and what are the issues that he thinks exist around diversity and inclusion. And here's how I'm going to show you that that is not real and that is not true. And that's a hard conversation to have. And it's been really systematic in terms of this is why your point is wrong. That's how I've approached it. But the other value is some of the things that they've said, which is, who are the other people? You expect me as this person who is responsible for diversity and inclusion to speak like this, to have this point of view. Who are the people that don't have to do this, that are speaking this? So who's my CTO who's going to speak about this? Who is my head of people ops who's going to speak about this and support this? And how can I train them to have these hard conversations where people are going to say things to them that they're not going to say to me, and are going to say things that they should feel offended by? How are they going to address it in that conversation, in that room? So really arming your allies with the power to say, this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to speak up and step up. Just a really quick example, right now at Asana, we're talking about the Me Too campaign. And I was so happy to see a guy join the conversation and really say, I don't know if this is the right thing to say, help me work this through. And some woman help him figure it out. They didn't have to help him figure it out, to be very clear. They didn't have to do that. And I stepped in to kind of say, Google is your friend, use it. But here's some other stuff to think about. So it's about allowing and facilitating that kind of two-way conversation, and also recognizing when the person is like, this is hard. Yeah, it is hard, but we've had to deal with it. We being we at that point who have had to deal with it, we're gonna help you through, but you have to figure this out on your own as well.
Thank you. I'm getting the pastime sign situation happening there, so if you have more questions, please come to the side, and hopefully the panelists will be able to stay an extra few minutes. We'd love to hear from you. I'm hearing some calls to action here around being able to have champions and unlikely champions to help with voice, to have empathy, to not be afraid to move fast and break things for that change to happen quickly, to look at your locus of control and to really stay the course, and then also, if you're in an environment that's not for you, to also be able to figure out how to make that shift so that you can be in a place where you belong and can thrive. So, to put words in your mouths, because we're out of time. Please join me in thanking this illustrious group of people. Thank you all very much.